Well, welcome everyone. Good evening. My name is Susan, and I'm one of the coordinators of programs here at York Public Library. This is Writers on Wednesday in conversation tonight with Kathryn Olmstead and Jenny Radsma. We're very excited to have these two wonderful ladies with us this evening. Kathryn is most recently the author of True North, a collection of her essays from Echoes magazine, which she helped edit, and the Bangor Daily News. It's published by Arlingport Press out of Yarmouth. She's a member, or was a member, I should say, a little retired right now, of the journalism faculty at the University of Maine in Orono. But her work and writing has appeared in national publications from USA Today to the Christian Monitor, in regional publications like the Maine Townsman and Islandport Magazine. Professor Olmstead joins us today from her home in Caribou, Maine, and we're delighted to have her. She's in discussion tonight with another University of Maine professor, Dr. Jenny Radsma, but in a totally different profession. Jenny is a nursing professor by day and a writer the rest of the time. She also is a published author. She wrote a very well-received anthology called Compassionate Journeys, Honoring Our Mother's Stories, that was published in 2019. Both of these books can be found at Bogan Books in Fort Kent, and we will have links to both the publishers and the bookstores at the end of this presentation. Jenny has also written for literary journals and other regional publications, but I think it's time for everyone to enjoy both this visual, you're going to be surprised, and audio presentation. And we're delighted to have them here at York Public Library tonight. Thank you so much. And remember, if your dog comes in like mine might, just mute that audio. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Jenny and Kathryn, for being here.
Well, thank you so much for inviting us. And we should mention to those people who are not from Maine that York and Fort Kent are at opposite ends of the state. So it's indeed a privilege for us to be invited to an event so far away. And it's the beauty of technology that allows this to happen. And it's very nice that you asked us. Jenny, did you unmute yourself?
I did, yes. Yep.
So
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, we've had such fun talking about what we're going to talk about tonight that I hope that the presentation is as effective as what we have enjoyed sharing in our preparations for tonight. But we really want to thank the York Library and thank all of you who have joined us for this conversation. So anyway, we had some prompts for ourselves. And I think that the first one was, and we're going to sort of talk to each other and answer questions that we think are interesting. We hope you do too. And then we'll have a few readings, from both of our books, and then open it up to you all for questions and answers. So we're going to try to separate the sections and be somewhat organized, but that might fall apart. But anyway, so the first question is how we got here and how we got to Maine and why we write about where we are. So I'm going to ask Jenny first, and then we can toss it back and forth.
So how did I get to Maine? I am from Alberta, so I'm really happy. I see a few people, my sister Frances, and I see Grace Little, also from Calgary, which is where I'm from, Calgary, Alberta. And I was working in northern Alberta, so the Canadian-US border is the 49th parallel, and then the border between Alaska and mainland Canada is the 60th parallel, and I live just south of that. And I just knew I was ready for a change. And I happened to see an advertisement for the job that I now have and have had here at the University of Maine at Fort Kent for the last 24 years. So that's how I got here, and haven't looked back. I've enjoyed every day that I've spent here in northern Maine. And then I realized, I guess I should also say, I left northern Alberta and I thought I was moving south, only to find out that I'm in northern Maine, and there's a lot of isolation here and very rural, and there's a lot of winter here too. So far, I think almost as much winter here as what I had in northern Alberta, which is a real surprise, or was a real surprise. Yeah. So Kathy, how is it that you got to northern Maine?
Well, I came to northern Maine in 1974, seeking a more sustainable and I'd say productive life, learning something about how to live off the land. So I was one of those back to the landers who arrived in the 1970s and bought an abandoned farm and spent a lifetime trying to fix it up. And I guess that the inspiration was really, I was married to a Swede, second generation Swede, and we were living in New Hampshire at the time. And we took a trip to Quebec and came back and decided we'd come through Maine. And we ended up we came south on 161 and we saw a sign that said Stockholm. And then we saw a sign that said New Sweden. And we decided, well, we just have to send a postcard to your dad if we're in this place. And that led us, long story short, to discover that there were classmates of his from Chicago living in this remote area, and we became enamored of the place. We found them. It turns out they were classmates of my husband. They all went to school in Chicago, and we all moved out at the same time. They moved from Chicago, we moved from New Hampshire and settled in New Sweden and Westmoreland, which is a suburb of New Sweden. So that there was that sort of serendipitous, we were all looking for a change in life, and we were taken with the people, we were taken with the beauty of the area and with the opportunity to change our life. So we did. We were both teachers. Yeah.
So then, Kathy, how is it that you started writing, writing and publishing the magazine Echoes? How did you get from your arrival in northern Maine to Echoes?
Oh, that's a long story. That was 14 years later. I had taken a job at the University of Maine in Orono, and I was teaching journalism. And I had, in the time that I was living in Westmoreland, which is the small town where I moved when my husband and I first came to Maine, I had this dream of, this place is so special. Wouldn't it be great to have a magazine? I wanted to create the northern version of Down East and call it Up North. But as fate would have it, I was too intimidated by the thought of having to pay for it. So I kind of put that on the back burner until I met a fellow who had in effect started a magazine, but it was a brochure, and his name was Gordon Hammond. And he had produced this magazine format brochure to promote Aroostook County, and people thought it was a magazine. And we met at that time, and his thought of, what am I going to do with these people who are asking for subscribers and for subscriptions? And so we put our heads together. We spent hours on the phone, and it was before the internet, so we had no email or anything. We just started brainstorming and decided we would try it. And so we launched the magazine in 1988 with a premiere, with a sort of a first edition. We gave away the brochure as a premiere, so that really is issue number 1. But we sent mailings to the mailing lists for all the weekly newspapers in Aroostook County, and people just grabbed onto the idea. And that leads into sort of what we were talking. One of the things we were talking about is how people from Aroostook really remember their roots, no matter where they are, because this magazine took off. And we got subscriptions from all over. Eventually, after 2 or 3, 4 years, we had subscribers in every state in the United States, probably with a list of like 6,000. So it was really kind of it took on a life of its own. So that's how the publishing, part of it happened.
And then you started the magazine when? What year?
1988.
And it ran for almost 30 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess that's how we met as well.
Yes, it is. And Sophie's putting up some pictures of a selection of echoes. The first one is the one on my picture, it's the blue one on the far left on the top. But yes, so we met when Jenny submitted an essay. You should probably talk about how the essay evolved, but we got this submission from a person in Fort Kent who I didn't know at the time. And it was one of those stories that was well written and very funny. And I laughed even after years of reading it, because we did include it in the anthology of Echo's stories. So do you want to just give us a flavor of, tell us the story of how you decided to write it, and then just give us some, readings from it.
First off, I'm a latecomer to writing, and I happened to have a sabbatical in 2006, 2007, and I ended up going back to Alberta for that. And I realized that a sabbatical is a wonderful opportunity to do things that I would not otherwise have the time to do or the opportunity. So I took a creative writing workshop one weekend, and this essay that ended up getting into Echoes magazine was that's what I started writing it in that workshop. And it started out, when I moved here 24 years ago, this notion of crossing the border, and people will talk about, I crossed today. And I go, cross, what do you mean? And it's crossing the river into Canada. And because Fort Kent is right on the border, I mean, I tell people I can actually, from where I'm living in the apartment I live, I can hear the dogs barking in New Brunswick. So that was totally foreign to me to cross the border, and then in that way, and to have border personnel asking the kind of questions that they did. So they would ask me, where are you from? And I would launch into this long story how I was born in Calgary, but I had lived in High Level. That's where I came from most recently, but I had a job in Fort Kent, and it was this long story. I realized it took me quite a while that I thought, oh, this is not really what they're after. It's not my long story. So I'd be happy to read an excerpt from that essay. The other question that they would ask me, where are you from? And then the next question, when they finally got me to shut up, so to speak, then they would say, anything to declare. And that was also foreign to me. Declare? What was I to declare? That I was a Canadian? That my parents had been born in Holland? That I had 4 sisters? I caught on, though, that no was expected. The typical answer savvy people gave when crossing the border so they could be motioned to move on. Before long, I came to understand that when crossing the border, brevity was expected. Answer only what is asked. Where are you headed? Harvey Station. What's your citizenship? Canadian. What's your status in the US? I'm on a visa. Do you have any guns, ammunition, mace, or pepper spray with you? No. Do you have any alcohol or tobacco with you? No. What's the value of any goods you may be leaving behind in Canada? $20 US. What's the nature of your visit? Social. How long do you plan to stay in Canada? 2 nights. Have a good day, ma'am. That was for crossing into Canada. Heading back into the US wasn't much better, as I then had to show my visa and give my litany to customs officers who at the same time were peering into my car and rummaging about in my trunk to see if any contraband could be found among the almost empty jug of wiper fluid, maps, umbrella, bungee cords, and windshield scrapers. Slow as I was to this new pastime of border crossing, I caught on and learned to charm. Now, each time I crossed, my goal was to engage with the guys, to see how little I could get asked. Mind you, this became much easier to do after I had my own car with Maine license plates, not an old rusted Toyota Corolla with New Brunswick plates registered in someone else's name that didn't even meet American EPA standards. It was also easier to do in Fort Kent, where the men and women who protected the northern border of their country from ne'er-do-wells and would-be terrorists came to recognize and know me. Indeed, a friend and I drove across the border with such regularity that one guard came to refer to us as Thelma and Louise. Well, if it isn't Thelma and Louise out again tonight, he'd say, a friendly grin on his face. And despite that it was post 9/11, with entry into the US typically characterized by vigilant and less than friendly border personnel, on those occasions when I crossed the border alone without my friend, he'd ask me where Louise was. I guess that made me Thelma. So that was my introduction into just this regular crossing back and forth. When you live 100 miles away from the border, it's just not the same issue as going back and forth that it is when you live in these border towns. Yeah, so Kathy, that means crossing here in Fort Kent is there's a bridge here across the St. John River, and it goes from Fort Kent, Maine, into Clare, New Brunswick, and there's a river really close to the bridge as well, another river, the Fish River, that feeds into the St. John River. And anyway, Kathy, you have a story to tell about that.
Well, we decided that this would be a timely discussion topic, because one of the big events of April in Maine and New Brunswick is Ice Out. And so because we do live on the river that is bordering in Fort Kent, it's between New Brunswick and it's between Clare and Fort Kent, and then in near where we are I'm on the Aroostook River, which is downstate from Fort Kent, and it runs from Caribou to Fort Fairfield and then into the St. John after it leaves Fort Fairfield. So, and again, we're river people here. And so because it's Ice Out time, I thought we would, and I'll cue in Sophie that we could do any of that ice, maybe the Ice Out picture of the river that's filled with ice. And the story of my story really is told in the story itself, which is called Ice Out, and this is in True North. When a New York Times reporter was a guest speaker in one of my feature writing classes at the University of Maine, she asked if my students could give her some information for a story. She wanted to know about the Maine phenomenon called Ice Out. The first response from the class was, lake ice out or river ice out? The reporter confessed she had never considered the difference and let the students enlighten her on one of the natural wonders of the North. The passing of the ice is such a carefully watched, long anticipated sign of spring. It is duly recorded and celebrated by many observers of lakes and rivers in northern Maine. Colleen Murphy of Caribou keeps a close eye on the Aroostook River and likes to predict what day the sheets of ice will flow over the dam in Caribou and fill the river with tons of giant slabs between Caribou and Fort Fairfield. She said, I so look forward to that milestone of spring, because now we know warmer weather is upon us and the fiddleheads won't be far behind. Word of Ice Out spreads fast in a small town, she said. Loads of people head to the river's edge to see what they can see. In some years, when the Ice Out is especially dramatic, the roadway will be lined with vehicles, which literally hundreds of people watching and socializing. And I must say, I also live on the Aroostook River. And so those vehicles, sometimes I can see them passing my house as they go down towards the dam, which is just about a mile down the road from me. And it is an event, it's a social event. Then downriver in Fort Fairfield, Phyllis Hutchins remembered awakening in the night to what sounded like dozens of big guns. In the morning, she would watch the churning, crashing, and these are her words, churning, crashing, thundering field of ice chunks push up onto the riverbank and tumble down the river. Lake ice out is less dramatic. At Madawaska Lake in Stockholm, north of here, Stanley Thomas spent 41 years greeting customers at his Stan's Grocery. Here he kept a day book recording the dates of ice out on the lake from 1964 to 2005. The earliest it went out was April 20th, he said. And this would have been in 2005 probably. The latest was May 30th, but it was usually right around May 10th. I think it's happening earlier now. And I have to add to that I was in the post office last week and Colleen Murphy, whom I mentioned from Caribou, called out to me and said, April 8th. And I turned around and I said, what? She said, April 8th. And then I knew that it was Colleen and that she's waiting for the day. And she's predicting that the ice is going to move over the dam in Caribou this year on April 8th. So now on to Fort Kent. And Jenny has the update on this one. Fort Kent on Maine's northern border holds a contest to see who can predict the exact minute the ice goes out. Now, Colleen predicts the day, and Fort Kent, they want to know what minute. And they've devised a mechanism for making this happen. A string stretches from a pallet in the middle of the frozen river to an electrical plug on a utility pole on the riverbank. This sends power to an old clock in the Fort Kent blockhouse with numbers that flip to tell the time. Did anyone ever see one of those clocks where the numbers flip?
No.
When the ice breaks up, the pallet moves, the plug releases, and the clock stops, displaying the winning time. Now, participants in Fort Kent buy chances to predict the correct minute that the ice will go out. And the winner shares the proceeds with a local service group, a different group each year. With one $2 ticket for every minute guessed, the contest has raised more than $2,500. And Jenny, you have the update on that in George Duman's story. The picture of the ice out sign is the identifying the winner of the contest.
So I think that the picture you just saw previously, that was yesterday morning, and this was yesterday, yes, and this one here was yesterday afternoon. So the ice went out sometime in the middle of the day. And I did see George Dumont, who started this tradition, and he said now he's not doing it anymore. The Lions Club is, and they're now doing it by 3-minute segments. So you guess within the nearest 3 minutes. But nonetheless, yeah, and that's what you just said. They raise about $2,000, $2,500 every year. So half of it goes to whoever the person who won, and the other half goes to a charity, a local charity. So anyway, it's it just makes for another, as you say, another sign of spring, or an early sign of spring, because we don't have. I got a picture, somebody sent me a picture of crocuses down in southern Maine, and we're a little ways away from that. So ice out when for us, and crocuses for you down south.
And Jenny asked me when I thought the ice out was going to be, and of course I had just come from the post office, so I said April 8th. And she said, oh, it's going to be much earlier up here. But I automatically said, well, she's further north than me, so ice out will be later. But in fact, on the Fish River, which, as you must know, flows north, so that doesn't mean that because they're further north, they have a later ice out, because the ice is still holding on the dam in Caribou.
Yeah. So Kathy, tell us how you published Echoes magazine for 30 years, and then last fall you published 2 books, Stories of Aroostook, which were essays that came. It was the best of the best essays. Right?
I have the book.
Yeah. the best of the essays from Echoes magazine, and then True North, and those were essays that you had written both for Echoes magazine, but also the Bangor Daily. So how did those two books come about?
Well, they're quite different. I have been thinking, I wrote for the Bangor Daily after retirement. Yeah, well, I wrote for the Bangor, it was full circle. When I first moved to Maine, I was a correspondent for the Bangor Daily. And that was in the 1970s. And then I went to teach and spent 25 years on the faculty and then came back. And then in 2010, I got a call from the editor, one of the news editors at the Bangor Daily News, and he said, we need a columnist and we want to boost our circulation in Aroostook County. Would you be interested? And I said, well, what do I write about? And he said, anything you want. And I said, seriously? So, I mean, that's a dream job. I mean, when I first started reporting and writing, I could not believe I was getting paid to ask people questions and to write their stories. I mean, that was just too much. But this was even better because I could choose, and I only had to do it every 2 weeks because it turns out another friend of mine from Fort Kent also wanted to write a column. So we alternated weeks. And so it was just, and the book displays, I mean, I wrote about a lot of different things, but it had to be about Aroostook County. So that's the answer to that. And that's most of the, I counted just before we went on the air tonight that most of the stories in True North are from the Bangor Daily. There are 7 from Echoes. And Echoes, actually, I wrote a column or a feature story once in a while, but most of my time was spent editing and publishing. So the anthology came about serendipitously. I had prepared this collection. I worked maybe a whole summer on True North, and I was ready to pitch it to whoever would listen. And I signed up to do a pitch conference by the same organization, I think, that you went to your workshop in the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance. And they offered you an opportunity to pitch your manuscript to a variety of editors. You had like 6 minutes and you had to present your idea in that time, and they rotated us in. It was all very tense. So I had this all ready for that, and I went to 4 different publishers, 2 from Maine and 2 I knew were long shots that I would never even consider it. But anyway, I did it anyway. It was a good exercise and very good discipline. And then in the meantime, before that happened, I got an email from Islandport Press saying they thought that would be a good idea to try to publish an anthology of Echo stories. And I said, well, yeah, that's been a dream a long time too. But so sure, why not? This makes it happen. And so that was sort of a coincidence. And so I tossed the idea around and talked with the publisher and decided that we could do it. I had an idea of things that I wanted. I had different categories of topics that we could group them in: cultural heritage and agriculture and nature and the beauty and all of those things, categories for stories that would be selected from Echoes. So he came and we talked about it, and I gave him probably 4 binders of stories in different categories, all the cultural groups in Aroostook County and all the, anyway, so, and then I said, oh, by the way, I have this book, which was, I had called in True North. And so I stuffed that in the tote bag that I sent him back to Yarmouth with, along with the stuff from Echoes. And he accepted them both. So fortunately, True North was pretty well done, because the process of selecting stories from Echoes, 117 issues with like 20 articles in every one, was a real task. And I had 3 people help me, a little committee. I said, I can't do this alone. So I had a little committee that we met every couple of weeks, and we'd go home with assignments, read articles, select the ones we liked the best, and narrow it down. The publisher asked for 100, from which he could select 50. And so we worked from August until January, I guess, and submitted the list to him. And then he narrowed it down. And then I had to go through the whole process of getting permission from all the 37 people who were in the magazine, and 8 of whom had died. And so I had to find their heirs. And I was calling libraries to get the obituaries to find out who the heirs were. And that's another long story that you don't want to hear, but it is interesting. And I loved it. It was so interesting to meet these people. And they were so excited, of course, especially the ones, well, as the living and the remaining, it was quite an experience. And so thankfully this committee helped me, and we put together a collection, and I found all the people. Only one of the people that we had selected stories from I was unable to find. And that was a person from Eagle Lake. So that's how that happened.
Okay, yeah. And so, and I know we talked about this the other day. Did you, you said that it was really smooth. There were no, what were the challenges of putting this together? Pulling your book, The Stories of Aroostook.
Well, we had a filter, which helped. The publisher said no fiction, no poetry. He wanted stories that were that would appeal naturally to a broad audience, that weren't timed and that weren't too specific. He really wanted to capture the culture and the essence of the sense of place. And so we had those filters, and that's what we used. And of course, the top filter was good writing. He wanted to have the best writing that we could select. And I don't know that there was more than we could have included. As I said in my introduction, I hope there will be a sequel, because there are many, many more stories. But there are 52 stories in the Stories of Aroostook, the anthology from Echoes, and then there are 29, I think, in True North, something like that, 29 or 39. I'm down to numbers.
Are you going to read us some from True North, Kathryn?
Yes, I thought I might. Well, I know that Sophie has pictures for a couple of them, and one of them is, and this is just excerpts from an essay called The Night Sky. So I'll read pieces of that. I don't have time for the whole article, but this should give you a flavor. It is, in fact, it's sort of an essay on the effects of light pollution, but the pictures, I am so thrilled to be able to show them to you in color, because much as I begged the publisher to publish at least one color picture in the book, they all ended up to be black and white, even the Northern Lights. So you folks who are watching tonight have the exclusive view of the real pictures that would have accompanied this story, and maybe one other one. So The Night Sky. The Big Dipper hung low over the highway in front of me as I drove north on Interstate 95. It was one of those crisp, clear evenings when the sky turns deep blue after sunset. I couldn't wait to get to Caribou to examine the night sky from my front yard. I was not disappointed. The sky was a blanket of stars bisected by the Milky Way, a broad swath, millions of stars in an arc over my head. Every time I experience such an evening, I'm struck with a wonder at the vastness of the universe, in the minuteness of my place in it. I try to imagine something totally beyond my comprehension. I think about my life in a way quite different from my general focus on day-to-day activities. Observing the firmament provides a periodic perspective on existence that I find valuable. Yet, in recent years, I have come to realize that I am among a dwindling number of people on the East Coast with such a pure view of the heavens. A writer for National Geographic explained that darkness is as essential to our biological welfare as light itself. In a very real sense, light pollution causes us to lose sight of our true place in the universe, to forget the scale of our being, which is best measured against the dimensions of deep night. with the Milky Way, the edge of the galaxy, arching overhead. The first year I lived in Aroostook County, my husband and I skied from the road to our house in the winter, crossing an open field about 1/10 of a mile. One night, on one of those treks, we noticed a bright band of light directly overhead, not the stars of the Milky Way, but a solid arc. When I returned to the yard an hour or so later, the band of light had moved to the north and widened. As time passed, the glow became the dancing luminescence of color that we would witness time after time thereafter. Aurora Borealis. I've lived in Aroostook County long enough now that I can hardly imagine the loss I would feel if I were unable to wander out into the darkness and be so small.
Well, that's beautiful.
Well, we feel that, you and I were talking about the effects of being from away. One of the other book discussions we had, someone asked if there's a difference between the things that people notice who come to Aroostook County from away as opposed to those who were raised there. And what is the, I guess that's the kind of a question both Jenny and I can answer because we're both transplants. We're both from away. So I'm thinking, is an outsider a reliable source for telling about a place?
Do the natives still notice the aurora borealis?
Oh, I'm sure they do. Yeah. And that's one thing both Jenny and I mentioned, that we do find that people here appreciate that. I remember I was asking a farmer when I was really new up here, do you realize how beautiful it is? Oh, yes. Like it is so beautiful. And so.
Yeah, and it's that from being away, can you be a reliable source in terms of describing the place? And I guess all you can do is say you describe it based on what your own observations and your own experience are. And over time, what do I say? I'm from Fort Kent now. I live in Fort Kent. This is my home, but I can't talk with any authority based on the generations before me. Like my grandparents did not come from here. But I think one of the things that I appreciate about living here is people's strong sense of place. And in ways that I come from an urban area, and as much as I like going back home, and Frances, you and I, we go back and take a look at, the house we grew up in at least about once a year when I happen to be home in Calgary. But I don't have that same sense of rootedness that I think people in these rural communities have been here for generations. And I think it's the connection with nature as much as anything, as it's the connection with nature, but it's the connection with the land as well.
Yes, I agree. I think it reminds me of an article I wrote about Kathy Pelletier, who's the author from Allagash. And when I was interviewing her, she recalled a time when she lived in Tennessee for like 17 years. And one time she was heading home and she was flying into Frenchville, I think. And her mother left a message at the airport and said, "Hurry home, the ice is running." And she knew what that meant. And if she broke the speed limit on Route 1 going north to Allagash, it was because she didn't want to miss that ice out that we were just talking about. But the other thing that was impressive to me is that it didn't matter where she was. Even in Tennessee, she knew when the ice was running on the St. John River. And so it's that there's something visceral about your connection to nature if you're raised in a place like this. And the example was that we got, for Echoes, one time we got a flurry of subscription orders from San Bernardino, California. Finally, somebody called me about their subscription. And I said, how come so many people are subscribing from San Bernardino? And she said, oh, well, someone brought the magazine to our Aroostook County meeting. And we all wanted to subscribe. So now I have two of my classmates from high school at Lakeview High School in Battle Creek, Michigan. Tell me, would anybody gather together because we were from Calhoun County? I mean, it's something about the place, and I think it is rooted in nature. Yvonne, who's is down in Maryland, could probably tell you. She relates to those Northern Lights images from her time at Bear Lake up in northern Michigan. And Jean Howard, who's up in even further north in Michigan, probably has those experiences. But I wonder, I mean, I don't feel like I need to get back to Battle Creek for some reason, but and I think it is, as Jenny said, I think there has something to do with a history of nature.
Yeah, and it's almost like because it's generational, it's almost like something is imprinted in people's DNA as well, and that gets transmitted from generation to generation. Yeah. Well, I'm just mindful of the time, and I'm wondering if we want to, if there's anybody who wants to make any comments or ask any questions.
Yeah, please do.
That's probably a
question. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in.
Oh, please do.
Hi, Lynn.
Sorry, is that rude?
She always has good questions.
Go ahead.
Actually, I was sitting here thinking about the whole transplant notion, and you answered my question in part, but I mean, we're all transplant. I'm a transplant, Jenny is, I know Jenny, and I know you, Kathy. And one of the things that struck me about the county folk is that they if you aren't from here, you know, they have to position you. You know, there's almost like a moment where they can't position you because they know the backstory of everyone. And that's always struck me as really interesting. And when you meet people from the county, they want to, you know who you're related to and what and where.
Yeah.
Do you think, I mean, did you think that I think that has made you both, you know, observant of the county and its people, and that comes so well through your writings, but do you think that's what drew you two together? Too, your own transplantness, and how'd you meet? That's my question.
How did we actually face-to-face meet? Yeah.
I think, Kathy, there was Fort Kent hasn't done it recently, but Fort Kent in the past has been very good about hosting parades. And there was a parade, if I'm not mistaken, was it an evening parade? And it was
celebrating, I think, the World Cup Biathlon, and it was a parade across the river.
It was a parade across the river. It started in Clare, New Brunswick. It was led by the RCMP on horseback, I think, and then by the governor of the state. And anyway, it was a wicked, cold night. And I think you stopped by my place before the parade started. You asked, could you park on my driveway? And then anyway, we walked over to where we could watch the parade until our toes practically fell off. And then we walked back home and sat in front of my fireplace and ate some hot chili and hot cocoa.
Okay, does that answer your question, Lynn?
I think that was how we face to face. Yeah.
I was curious. I didn't ask my question, but like, because everyone else has connections, maybe it draws people who are not, you know, have those social connections together.
I think the other thing that I know from living in Maine, particularly, but then especially in northern Maine, is, you know, that 6 degrees of freedom or that 6 degrees of separation. It's like there is, you just have to, it's 2 degrees in a rural place, and really in the state of Maine as well. That, oh, you're from Fort Kent. Oh, do you know so-and-so? Oh, my cousin lives there. You know, I mentioned that I work at UMFK. Oh, my niece, she's a student there, right? That kind of stuff. And it doesn't matter where you are in this state, you will, you know, you hear that. So I think it was a woman who taught art here at UMFK who told me about Kathy, Kathy was publishing this Echoes magazine, and when I mentioned that I had an article and I thought I'd like to get it published, she said you should send it to Kathy. So that's how that got initiated. Yeah.
Are there other questions out there?
Yeah, hi Kathy.
Yeah.
Hi. That leads into this question. How did you get articles? Did people just send them to you? Did you have to go solicit articles? How'd you get your articles?
At first, I had a few students writing articles who were from Aroostook, but basically the readers were the writers, and that became the community that both read and wrote for the magazine. We didn't solicit a lot. Occasionally, I would have some that I needed, and I had a stable of photographers. If I had a story without or an illustrator, well, Gordon did most of the illustrations because he was an excellent artist, especially with black and pen and ink line drawings. But most of that came over the transom, and the hardest part was not accepting everything. But you know that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow.
Do
Yeah.
you think, both of you, do you think things have changed a bit in recent years because we're connected, but the economy has changed and we've been through a lot in the last 10 years? Do you think the rural community has changed recently? For instance, I read some of the articles, about the potato farming and that sort of thing. And I know that's not done by local kids anymore. So is there other changes that you might see now?
That's a big one, and Jenny can weigh in on this. As far as agriculture goes, when I first moved here, they were still hand picking. And I kind of thought to myself, I took tons of pictures of the potato barrels and the potato baskets, the things that people talk about in those articles in the stories of Aroostook, because that is a passing tradition. And some farmers still do hand harvest, mostly for the nostalgia of it and just to keep that tradition. But of course, as mechanisms came in, the mechanical harvesters were took over, as did conglomerates of agriculture, so that
Right.
all the farms were bought by big agribusiness, right? And then that eliminated the children from the fields because they were not allowed to work on the harvesters because they were too young. But the high school kids still get out of school, and they still do. They still work the harvest. They don't always. They will work during harvest. They don't always work on the harvest, but they work. And the school is. It's always a big issue, and it's probably will be coming up again and again. And there are some high schools even that have discontinued the fall harvest, but most, I would say, I think, still have a 3-week break between late September and early October when the kids get out of school and they work in the fields.
Yep.
Yeah.
Other changes are huge. Yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
Well, I was going to say I think potato harvest or potato break or potato harvest break. Although there are fewer and fewer kids who work on it now, in part because about young kids working in those kind of settings, but there's a lot of communities that are reluctant to give up the harvest break, so they start school in the middle of August and then have 2 or 3 weeks off. Up here, I think it's 2 weeks in September, at the end of September, and so it's an opportunity for kids to work full time wherever it happens, that they happen to be working. But in terms of other changes I'm seeing, I think there is always the pull about the, the sustainability of rural communities. And so there's, we're very fortunate, I think, in Maine to have the number of universities with the University of Maine system spread across the state the way it is. But by the same token, there's, you can educate people, but if there's no jobs for them in their home communities, the likelihood is that they're going to leave and move elsewhere. So in an ideal situation, then they at least stay in Maine so that you can retain that, that brain power. But I think that's always a real push-pull, and you can see it in a lot of these small towns. Madawaska is just up the river from us here. It's a mill town, and the mill is still it's a pulp and paper mill. It's still in operation, but its workforce is diminished. It's not nearly the size it was, And you can see the real estate, the amount of real estate for sale, the amount of commercial real estate for sale. And you can just sort of see some of these towns becoming depleted because of those kinds of pressures, those economic pressures.
On the other hand, I would say keep an eye on rural areas post-pandemic,
Yes.
because so many people have moved not just to Aroostook, but certainly to Maine. Real estate agents up here cannot keep their houses. You know, they're selling them so fast. So there may be, with the pandemic, the recognition that you can work from home and liberating people. And there are story after story in the Bangor Daily about people who have come up from urban areas and discovered that they can either live year round in their recreational home, what they thought was their camp, what do we call cabins in Michigan, or move lock, stock, and barrel without having been here before.
I loved what you said about remembering their roots. Both of you mentioned this, and that it's in their DNA, and that you have to go back generations. And I think it was somebody else asked a question about that. I'm like you, I'm from away, and my son married someone that was from like 6 generations back. And we found out recently that they had a family meeting to see if he could marry into the family.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you know that we adopt that. I find myself doing what Lynn was saying. I feel like I have students, and there's one article in True North called Helping the Farmer, when there was one semester when I just had quite a few students from Aroostook County. So after they graduated from college, I had them all out for a picnic. But the first thing, when I first saw them in class, I would say that, who are you related? Who are your people? Who are your parents? You know, who are you related to? And I'm not, I mean, I found that I had actually adopted that habit that people have here of wanting to know where you're from and who you're from and all of that personal history.
Yeah. So it's just, we've passed muster now, but it took a while.
Well, we felt when we first moved here that we would have to prove ourselves, because we'd heard New England was cold and, you had to really prove your worth of being here, but we never felt that. I always felt welcomed, and people were grateful that we bought this old farm and had the energy to put it together, and that we were interested in the culture. And we had a little magazine that the kids wrote that was based on Foxfire, that they interviewed their elders. And so there was a welcoming here of new people.
Absolutely. And I think, as somebody else said, though, that you really have a wonderful sense of place in all your stories, and that, Jenny, you have kind of that quirky Canadian sense of humor. And if anybody else has anything to share, I think they should at this time ask these two, because they have a wealth of knowledge between them that's really great.
And I think if you haven't I think we should give Jenny a chance to talk a little bit about Compassionate Journey.
Yes, you
That
should.
book, and
Tell
how that book evolved, Jenny, and maybe if we have time, I know we have 5 minutes, that we could maybe read an excerpt from it. This was I'll let you tell a story.
Okay, so this is Compassionate Journey. It was a book I went to a writing workshop with the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance. It was held in Portland, and it was 2012, and it was the Saturday after Mother's Day. And it was a workshop specific to writing about our mothers. And it really, being there and listening to other people read what they had written in that short period, those few hours that we were together, I was really impressed. So I thought, my observations were, is I've gone to other workshops, and rarely do you ever finish what you've started? At least that's been my experience. You have, great time with one another, and then it sort of ends up collecting dust when you get home. So I contacted the facilitator of the workshop, and long story short, to see about all of us collecting an anthology. So in the end, it was five of us women who had met at that workshop, who held together for a few years, and with the express purpose of putting our essays together about our mothers. And so that's how Compassionate Journey came to be. And then I guess, and I guess the reason I wrote about my mother in particular, and is that I grew up among Dutch immigrant families. So I was so accustomed, everybody, you know, was in Canada because that was, and in Calgary in particular, because it was post-World War II, it was hard to find housing. The Netherlands had a really hard time recovering after the war. So many of them immigrated to Canada. And so I was surrounded by this, and my parents and everybody else's parents had these thick Dutch accents. So it was so-called normal. And then it struck me that these, my parents have since gone, other parents, the parents of other friends have also since died. And I realized that those stories of immigration are going, the accents that, that my parents and their friends spoke, they're going, and I thought it just needed to be documented. So that's what prompted me to write this story about my mother. So I don't know, do we have time? I mean, I would read something, but I don't want to hold people longer than is necessary.
You could read something real quick, Jenny. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, so this is from the beginning of my of the essay, and my sister Frances is here, so thanks, Fran, for coming. And this happened in, I don't know, actually it was, I think, just before that writing workshop in 2012. I got a phone call from Frances to say our mother had fallen through the night. And so a fall is often the undoing of otherwise healthy elderly people, and my mother is no exception. She undergoes surgery later in the day to repair her fractured hip, and thereafter, Frances updates me daily about what turns out to be a poor prognosis. On days my mother is alert enough, Frances holds the cell phone to Mom's ear. Her words are slurred, the residual of a stroke she suffered days after the surgical repair of her hip. Some 2 weeks into this ordeal, I hear her say in a dull, flat voice, difficult to comprehend as my mother's, "Jenny, when are you coming home?" She pronounces my name with a Dutch inflection. She often asks this question of me in anticipation of my next visit, but this time her question resonates as something deeper. She's weak and more vulnerable than ever before, and the reality sinks in that my mother is unlikely to regain the ground she lost from this cascade of events, that she will no longer be the person who asked me the same question only 4 months ago on New Year's Eve. That night, together with residents and visitors, we welcomed in the first few minutes of 2011. After singing actually, I think that should be 2012. After singing Auld Lang Syne with everyone, Frances and I swallowed the last of our tea, then rose to put on our coats. Mom accompanied us to the foyer of her building. At the door, she leaned across her walker to kiss me. I hugged her in return and tried to impress everything about that moment in my memory. I took in her stooped back, gently strumming my hands along the washboard of her ribs beneath her sweater. I patted the short gray hair she curled with rollers every night. I breathed in her clean smell, heard her uplifted voice, saw the perpetual white tissue peeking out from where she had tucked it up her sleeve. I felt her velvety soft cheek against mine. The gold wedding ring she wore, her own and my father's, clinked together with the movement of hands now shrunken by age. The sparkle in her eyes, her visible happiness and contentment, I imprinted it all. As we said goodbye, Mom asked, and I told her I'd be home in late spring, less than 6 months away. I promised to call her every day. These scenes race through my mind when I hear my mom in the fog of dementia and post-operative pain medication ask me on the phone, "When are you coming home, Jenny?" "As soon as I can, Mom."
Oh, thank you, Jenny.
That is beautiful. That's
Well,
detail, and you can see what kind of a writer Jenny is. Oh, nice.
thank you. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to share these stories with you and to share our experiences of being transplants in Aroostook County and in Maine.
Well,
Yeah.
you've been here quite a while. You've earned your chops.
Thank you so much for including us in your program. It's been really fun. Thank you.
Yes, we've been
Yeah.
delighted to have you. And remember, everyone, you can get their books at Bogan Books, and they have them at Island Point Press too. And we've really enjoyed having you both. It's been a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, Kathryn. And thank you, Jenny. Yay. Yeah.
Thank
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And